topic. This came up in our Facebook group, and people kind of voted on the top skills that they wanted to learn more about. So that brings us to today and what we're going to talk about around active listening skills. So before we get into it, I really just want to ask you a couple of questions to see if these might resonate with you. So has this ever happened to you, maybe in a coaching session or during a health history? Or if you're not coaching yet, maybe this is something that you worry about happening. So thinking things like when you get into your coaching session, your client shares or you ask a question and they answer, and then you say something like, well, I think that, so you're trying to give your own personal opinion. So these are what I'm explaining right now are sort of some of the key things that we do as new coaches that aren't really the greatest active listening skills. So when our client speaks and shares, we might say something like, giving our opinion and say, well, I think that. So you share your opinion. You might try to explain what the client is experiencing. So you may say something like, well, this is a very common thing, let me explain to you what's happening. I know that was a key one for me. Perhaps you dive right into sharing your own personal story. So it's like, oh my gosh, me too. That happens to me all the time, or I can totally relate to that. And then you get into your whole backstory. Or maybe, after your client answers a question or shares something, you just start to ramble on and you're not really saying anything meaningful or purposeful. So those are a lot of pitfalls we can fall into as new coaches because we're not quite sure, what do we say? What do we do? What path are we trying to take the client down? So I know for me, when I reflect back 10 years ago as a new coach, that second one, explaining what was happening, was really something that I did all the time. So the client would share, they'd answer a question, and I'd really try to relate and sympathize with them, and I would try to normalize the situation. So I'd get into this long explanation of, oh, well, from my experience, I think this is what's happening, or, I've read that this, could be likely what's happening, or, the mind does this, or just trying to explain it, normalize it, and just sympathize with the client. And, I think that's a pretty normal response when we're new coaches, because that's really what we do in our everyday life, with our friends and our family members and our colleagues. If somebody's struggling, we try to explain it. We try to be with them. We sympathize. We, try to figure out a solution. And all of that is great in everyday life, but if someone has hired you to be a health coach for them and support them in reaching their goals, those kinds of responses, reactions in a coaching session, it's not coaching. Let's just face it, right? It's just not. So, way back when I was doing this and I was first starting out, I would come out of those client sessions and I would feel pretty icky. I would feel like, well, I just, was their friend and I really wasn't forwarding the action. I wasn't moving them toward their goal. I was really just sympathizing with them and being with them. And that's part of it. That's part of coaching, but we do really want to be able to be effective and competent with our skills to move the client forward. So what I did was I went on to do, as you may know, a bunch of other training, certifications, accreditations, because I really, really wanted to get good at those skills. I wanted to understand them, I wanted to learn them, I wanted to practice them, and I wanted to be able to bring them into my coaching sessions with clients so that I could be effective and really provide value to my clients so that they could, make progress toward their goals. So that was really the key for me when I understood, number one, what these skills were and how you would actually use them. And then I started to practice them. And then I got actually a lot of feedback from a mentor that I worked with. And he gave me lots of, constructive criticism because he listened to recordings of my coaching. And so when I did all of that, that's when things started to shift for me. And I started to use these active listening skills and I was getting good at them. And that's when, I felt really good in my coaching with my clients. And then my clients also started to respond well and make progress toward their goals. So if any of this resonates with you today in terms of things that you might be doing in your own coaching or worried about what you're going to do when you do get those clients, then you're absolutely in the right spot, because I'm going to cover today 3 key active listening skills that really every health coach needs in their toolkit as part of their techniques. So As you know, listening skills really are the essence of what we do as coaches. We really do need to get good at them. We need to listen really, really well, and then we need to use all of the techniques that go around the actual listening to really be good, competent coaches. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about paraphrasing and restating. We're also going to talk about how we reflect feelings with our clients, and then how do we summarize. So these are 3 great tools we can use whenever the client has just spoken, answered a question. These are our go-tos. These are the basic things that we always want to be doing first before we're jumping into action or processing or anything else. These are really our go-tos. So these are ones that you're going to want to get good at. So why is it so important to have great active listening skills? So, number one, they can really help to just really build a solid coaching relationship. Of course, the client's going to feel heard, witnessed, and seen. And honestly, is there any other better feeling in the world when somebody else really sees, hears, and understands you and really gets you? That's a pretty amazing feeling, and we really want to bring that to our clients. Also, active listening skills can go a long way to helping your client just open up, sort of that self-disclosure piece, helps them open up, be more creative with potentially their responses and what they're willing to do, helps, relay and impart useful information for you and the client to understand. Helps to really build trust, and overall, helps to enhance that coaching relationship, which we know is so important. So let's start with paraphrasing and restating and give you some examples of that on how you can start using those a little bit more. So really, restating and paraphrasing, they're all about getting to the essence of what the client is saying. We're really trying to understand and get to the essence of what they're saying. So restating is as simple as it sounds. It's really just about repeating back to the client in their own words what they've just said. So it really reassures them that they've been heard and listened to. We're sort of mirroring back to them what they're saying. It helps the client realize what they've actually said. So there's this realization, oh yeah, that's actually what I said. It also gives them an opportunity to clarify. Maybe you got it wrong as a coach. So to clarify and really just, clear up any misunderstanding that you might have had around what they were trying to say. And restating can also be a really great tool for punctuating something that's really important to the client. So I had an example of this last week. I was working with a client, and she was talking about, we were sort of processing this fact that she wanted to go back to school, and we were talking about the benefits and the downsides and just going through the whole scenario. And at the end of the conversation, I asked her, as you reflect back on what we've just talked about, what's coming up for you? In terms of this getting back to school. And she said, and these were her words, she said, "I am strong, and taking this course will make me stronger." Bam, right? So I said, okay, we just have to pause here for a moment, and I really want you to hear what you just said. And so I repeated it back to her in her own words. I said, what you just said was, "I am strong, and taking this course will make me stronger." How powerful is that? So it was really about punctuating this really important phrase, this realization that she came to. So that's how we can restate. That's some of the ways that we can do it. So phrases that we can use in restating are things like what I'm hearing you say is, what I'm hearing is, am I correct in hearing that? So any of those phrases or those questions that begin with, I'm hearing that, do I hear? All of those are really great tools to just restate back what you've heard from the client. So now we get into paraphrasing, which is very similar, but just slightly different in the fact that we are getting at the essence of what the client is saying, but we're not necessarily saying it in their own words. And we might actually be condensing, a longer piece, a story, something that they've shared, and we're kind of condensing it to get at the essence. So, we might say it in a different way than the client might have said it, which can also be really powerful, because sometimes the client will be like, oh, well, now that I hear you say it in that way, it's making me think of this, or it's making me realize, or I believe, or I want. There just could be a realization that comes out of it when you may say it back to the client in just a slightly different way. When you paraphrase, you can also use some of the words that the client said. That's okay too. So, there's no real right or wrong there, but it's really just getting to the essence of what they're saying. So, usually a paraphrase is much shorter than the original story or whatever it was that the client was saying. So some of the ways that we can paraphrase, some phrases we can use, we could say things like, if I'm hearing you right, you said this. So are you saying that, and then you just state it because you want to get clarification. If I hear you correctly, you're saying, or I hear that you believe, I hear that you feel, I hear that you want to. So those are some ways to really just paraphrase what you've heard, restate it back to the client, paraphrase it back, and then get that clarification that you got it right. So yeah, that's restating and paraphrasing, and these are our go-tos. If you don't know what to do after the client has just spoken, your number one thing is just to repeat back what they said. It'll give you time to come up with that next question, and hopefully it'll also just deepen their understanding and the reflection of the coaching at the time. So now let's talk about the second active listening skill today, which is reflecting feelings. So in coaching, feelings are really important. However, we want to make sure that we're not getting into therapy here. So we're not trying to analyze, process, get to the root cause of feelings. In coaching, what we're trying to do is really just name and notice and acknowledge the feelings. So why do we want to do this? Because really by noticing, naming, and just, highlighting a feeling for a client, sometimes it can just, by doing that, can take the power out of it. So it can alleviate some of the emotion around the feelings. Also, understanding our feelings can really help us change our behavior, and that's what we're doing as behavioral change coaches with our client, right? When we can understand what we are feeling, and identify those feelings, perhaps we as the coach can help the client understand maybe the severity of a situation or a challenge that they're facing. Or maybe can help them understand the importance of making a change to the client if they get the feelings behind them. So, of course, in health and wellness coaching, a lot of feelings can come up. This is tough stuff to work on our health and our well-being and make behavioral, dietary, and lifestyle changes. That's tough stuff. So a lot of feelings can come up around this. So again, as coaches, we don't want to try to interpret, we don't want to try to analyze or process those feelings. But again, we're just naming, we're acknowledging, so that we can sort of dilute some of the high emotions and tension that might be going on around a situation. You're really simply offering the client an observation about what they're feeling, about what you're seeing and hearing. So an example of this was recently in a coaching circle that I was facilitating. There was a student who got really emotional, and this was at the beginning of COVID, and she was talking about how impactful, COVID was on her family and what was happening. And you could just, we weren't video, we were just audio, so I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel and I could hear in her voice started to crack, and I could feel that she was starting to cry. So there was emotion coming up. And, really the only course of action in that moment is just to be with those feelings, to be with the emotions, and to let the client know, I hear that there's some emotion coming up around this for you. Just take a moment to just catch your breath, just be with the feelings, whatever they are for you. You might want to ask the client, did you want to name the feeling? What is it that you're feeling right now in this moment? And again, simply by acknowledging that feeling and being with it and allowing the client to have a moment to just catch their breath and move through the feeling can really do a lot to just, take away some of the power from those feelings so that you can move on. So, some tactics, some phrases, things that we can do to address feelings with our clients. Similar to what I just said, we could say something like, I hear there's a lot of feeling and emotion in what you're saying. Can you name those feelings? So really seeing if the client can name what the feeling is. If the client can't really name it, the coach could say something like, well, it sounds to me like that might be anger or frustration or worry or sadness. So you can make a suggestion. This is what I'm sensing it might be. This is what my gut feeling is telling me that you're feeling. You know, does that resonate? Does that feel right? So that's one way that we can, you know, start to reflect some of those feelings back. Another example, you know, perhaps your client has decided that they really want to eat better and they made some action steps and plans to do this. And, you know, you come to the coaching session and they say, you know, I'm really struggling with this every day at work. You know, my coworkers want to go down to the takeout and get takeout food for lunch. And I find myself just giving in because of everything that's going on. And so I'm feeling like, you know, like really frustrated around this, like I'm not making any progress and like I'm a failure. So the client can share that story. So a way we can reflect feelings back to them is to just really say something as simple as, you know, I really hear that you're feeling frustrated and like a failure. So we're just, again, noticing, we're acknowledging, and we're naming those feelings so that we can move on. So some other phrases and words that we can use around feelings, we could say things like, it sounds like this might be really difficult for you. You seem really excited about this. So the feelings can be good and on the more negative side. Maybe we could say, what I hear is perhaps you're worried about this. It sounds like you feel confident about this. Or I can sense some emotion around this, and then move forward to try to name the emotion. So that's how we can reflect feelings. So that's coming up for you, and whatever your client is saying, if you ask a question, then that's another route we can go to really start to look at those feelings. And then we come to our final active listening skill today, which is summarizing. So this is a great other technique that we can use throughout our coaching session to really mark some milestones and bring some clarity to the coaching. So summarizing is all about providing a recap or a review of what's being experienced and expressed by the client. So we definitely 100% want to do this at the end of every coaching session to recap what we went through during the coaching session, and then to recap what the client has committed to. So that could sound something like, so after everything that we've spoken about today, you've committed to increase your meditation from 3 days a week to 5 days a week, and you're going to increase it from 10 minutes each time to 20 minutes. And you're going to start that on Monday. So that would just be summarizing back to the client what they've committed to and what you covered during the coaching session. But you can also use summarizing throughout the course of the session. It's a really great way to sort of stay on track, and you as the coach or the facilitator, right? You're owning the process. So you want to make sure that the client knows where you are in the process during the whole time. So you could do this throughout the session to keep the client on track, kind of like those milestones along the way. So you could say something like, all right, we've done our accountability check-in, we've set the agenda for our session today. Are you ready to get into coaching? So you're just summarizing where you are in the coaching process. Also at the end, you know, it could be, okay, you know, just noticing the time, we have about 5 minutes left, you know, let's come back and start thinking about your action steps and your commitments and your takeaways from today's session. So you can also use summarizing as a way to set up a powerful question. So again, you're kind of summarizing what you've gone through. Okay, we've talked about this, this, and this. We've established this, that, and that. Now, what's your learning or your takeaway or an insight that you have about yourself from that exploration? So you're kind of summarizing what you did and looking at what the insight or the takeaway might be. We could also summarize a list of items. So maybe the client has, you know, 5 or 6 things that they want to work on. So you just go through and say, okay, so what I'm hearing is you want to work on healthy eating, you want to work on some exercise, you also want to work on your sleep, getting more out in nature, and your spiritual connection. So that's a summary, a list of all the things that the client might want to work on. So also, finally, one final way that we can use summarizing, it's also a great way to sort of interrupt, really just respectfully interrupt the client when they're maybe going on a rant or they're telling you a big story. So what we're essentially doing here is asking the client to summarize or bottom line the essence of whatever it is that they're talking about. So, you know, I'm just going to interrupt you here for a moment. You know, I sense that there's a lot of background to this story. I was wondering if you could just summarize or bottom line for me the essence and the importance of this story to our coaching today. So getting the client to sort of summarize where they're at with the story. So those are some key active listening skills that are really your go-tos, your basics. So once the client has shared, once you've agreed to the agenda for the coaching session and you actually get into it, this is really, you know, what we want to practice. We want to restate, rephrase, we want to reflect some feelings, and we want to summarize along the way. So if you don't know what to say after the client answers a question, your go-to is always just to restate and rephrase back to them what you heard. That'll give you time to think about what the next question is, and again, it's going to deepen the coaching process. So another tip that I find really, really helpful is to take really good notes. So I'm a big note taker, and I really want to make sure that throughout the course, whenever the client says something that's really important, those phrases, I'm just scribbling all of that down so that I have it as reference, so that I can effectively repeat and summarize back what my client has said. So I hope that's been helpful today. So whether you're actually working with clients yet or still studying, or you do have clients, you know, you can start to practice these active listening skills just in your everyday life with your friends, your family members, your partner, your kids. These are just great communication tools. So, you know, start practicing restating and paraphrasing back to someone what they've said. You know, highlight those important things. Start to name feelings. So when you're talking to someone and there's some emotion there, start to even think in your mind, what are those feelings, so you can start to identify them. And then summarize. You know, that's another great way in your day-to-day communication to really just get really efficient and just be good at those communication skills. So you can practice them whether you have paying clients or not. And I really encourage you to start doing that so that you can hone those skills and become a more competent and confident health coach. So thanks for tuning in today, everyone. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to just post those in the comments below and I'd be happy to answer them. So bye for now, everyone. Thanks.